Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. I'm very happy that today I have with me as a guest the author of this book, Do You See What I See? And this is Memoirs of a Blind Biker, and he juxtaposes lasers and love, ESP and the SeeEyeA, and the meaning of life. So I'm happy to welcome my guest, Russell Targ. Thank you for joining me on the show.
I'm happy to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm really happy because I'm here at the Media Center in Palo Alto, and that's hence we have the background in the Media Center's studios here at 900 San Antonio Road. And you've been a guest here before.
I have. And what we're looking at here is the foothills of Palo Alto looking out over the city.
Yeah. Now, you've lived in Palo Alto a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, I came from New York City to Palo Alto in 1962. So I've been here more than 40 years. I was practically a pioneer.
Right. And in reading this book, I was saying that when Alan Steinfeld was introducing you, I was in the control room, and you had said that you wrote the book for your family, and I was surprised. Can you kind of elaborate?
Well, I did a lot of work for the CIA, doing ESP research. When you work for the CIA, you can never tell people what's actually going on, because it's all classified secret.
Right.
But by and by, the program we did at Stanford Research Institute ended, the program was declassified, and finally I got to be 75 years old, and I decided it's time to tell the truth, describe what we had done in the program, what I had been doing in my life, and the relationship of magic, love, ESP, meditation, put it together as I currently understand basically what do I think I'm doing now. So that was what I hoped to do in writing this book.
Right, and you said you didn't write it to make money, and yet I think the topics, if they were understood, a lot of people should have access to this information.
Well, I have been visually handicapped for my whole life. I've always had very poor vision, but nonetheless I've been able to accomplish a lot of things. I even convinced the motor vehicle people to let me ride a motorcycle in spite of the fact that I was legally blind. And one of the things I thought would be useful about writing this book is to inspire other visually handicapped people that poor vision need not restrict what they can do. They can travel abroad and do all sorts of interesting things and hopefully get adequate glasses to allow them to do what they want to do. And that's one of my current hobby horses, because I'd been legally blind for most of my life. And then after I retired from Lockheed Aerospace, where I was an engineer doing optics, I began interested in improving my own vision, and I simply discovered that there are new, better glasses available that give me a couple of more lines on the eye chart that I could have used for the rest of my life, earlier part of my life. And I had known for many years that people with certain kinds of visual handicaps, like diabetic retinopathy, are always underprescribed. Mm-hmm. So in the course of my life, I've met people who are functionally blind because nobody wants to give them 8 diopters of correction. They want to save that for their old age. But with ample correction, even people with very, very poor vision are able to read. Basically, the story is that anybody who is able to read by holding a magnifying glass in their hand can have functional vision if they have adequate glasses, and that's a secret somehow.
Now, this idea of functional vision, it means you want to bring everybody in on the same page. Like when I said I wanted to do a show with you, I wanted to focus on perception, because I think it's felt that we would be a better functioning society if we were all perceiving as each other is perceiving, and yet that's really not the case. I had my eye doctor on my show because I had dramatically improved my eyesight with radioactive stones. I didn't need reading glasses anymore. And I found out then by reading his book that sight is so much more than 20/20, that eyes don't tell people what they see, people tell eyes what to look for. And I know you have said in the past, you made a lot of funny jokes about how you would be doing meditation practices essentially and being paid for it. And yet it wasn't frivolous what you were doing. You were developing yourself. And as a leader for our society, and then working for the CIA, the idea is that the CIA is defending our country. So again, you want to be really clearly perceiving reality to defend properly.
Well, I think what you're referring to is I led a program in ESP research and applications at Stanford during the Cold War, starting in 1972. And one of our favorite experiments was to have the psychic of the day, which could have been you or a government contractor or a SRI representative, whoever was going to try and do something psychic, would sit with me in the laboratory, and my colleague Hal Puthoff would drive to some random place in the San Francisco Bay Area, which I did not know about, of course, and I would then try and guide you to have a psychic experience, to psychically see by what we call remote viewing, direct perception, direct clairvoyance. I would try and guide you to have that psychic experience. And I found that many, many people were able to do that quite successfully, and that was the basis of the program. That is, for research, we would look at the churches and boat harbors and hills and bowling alleys in Palo Alto. For applications, we would try and find out where American generals were kidnapped or what Soviets were doing at their weapons factory or lost bombers in Africa. So we had an application portion of the program where we were successful at finding lost things or hidden things all over the world. For research portion, we would be looking for people in Palo Alto who were hiding at some Bay Area site, which we could then show them. I would always be the stay-at-home person because I don't drive. So Hal Puthoff would go and drive somewhere within a half hour, and then I would try and guide you to have a psychic experience. What I found over that decade is that most people that I would sit with would be able to successfully describe this distant place. Even though I didn't have any idea what it would be, I developed a skill as a facilitator. Doesn't mean that I became psychic, but over a decade, I had become skillful at helping people develop that psychic ability.
Were you a good projector? Is that a term or not?
No, I was not a projector because I had nothing to project. I didn't know where they were hiding. But I could help you separate the psychic signal of where the person was hiding from your mental noise of memory, imagination, and thing that we call analytical overlay. Things like naming and analysis and imagination and memory are all the enemies of ESP. So after a decade, it became clear to me there was much more to a human being than just the physical body.
Right.
That it didn't make sense to think that who you are is what's sitting in the chair. So what you're referring to in the book that I say that my spiritual development or my introduction to spiritual things was paid for by the CIA, which is a very unusual situation because it came as a result of my sitting in the laboratory for a decade, and it was obvious that who we are could not possibly be just a physical body, but rather, as Ramana Maharshi would have said 50 years ago, that who we are is non-local awareness.
Right.
We're the awareness that can transcend space and time. And the fact that we can experience what's in the distance and what's in the future with great accuracy shows that we could not possibly be simply limited to a physical body. We should take good care of our physical body, because bodies are hard to come by. But
so we've been told, you know.
That's right. The Buddhist law
told.
says that bodies are very hard to come by and we should cherish them. But if you think that who you are is what you see in the mirror in the morning, then you're in for a lot of suffering.
So all the time that you spent with your eyes closed, because you said you probably spent more time than most people with your eyes closed, it seemed to do more than just develop the ability to have psychic powers, but you started to grapple with questions like the meaning of life.
Well, when I would sit with my eyes closed, or when I do a workshop, I'm now retired. My last job, I spent a dozen years at Lockheed putting lasers on airplanes to detect other invisible things like wind shear and air turbulence. So I went back to my roots when the SRI program ended. I went back to Lockheed, and I was very happy that they didn't hold my ESP research against me. But eventually I retired, and what I'm doing now is teaching people to be psychic. So I'm doing workshops
When you say
here and there.
they didn't hold it against you, why do you think such activity it's marginalized, is what you're saying? It's considered an offbeat topic? And
Well,
yet,
ESP is marginalized and considered offbeat because we don't know how it works. See, modern physics is very successful at describing how cars run and airplanes fly and nuclear fission and all kinds of things. So modern physics is quite successful, but it doesn't actually explain how somebody can sit in the laboratory in Palo Alto and describe a weapons factory in Soviet Siberia 6,000 miles away. Modern physics finds that quite bizarre. At least it did up until the past decade or so. Modern physics now talks about something called non-locality, which is an aspect of the space and time that we live in that requires quantum interconnectedness between certain elementary particles or photons that are born together. It's the idea that if photons are born together or entangled, then they can travel away from one another at the speed of light. And if you grab the one on the left, it has an effect on the one at the right. So the kind of seeming action at a distance or entanglement, Erwin Schrödinger knew about that in the 1920s, and he invented the term entanglement. Einstein hated the idea, wrote a famous paper in the 1930s saying that because quantum mechanics proposes such a preposterous idea, it's obvious that there's something the matter with quantum mechanics. And then in 1970, two scientists at the University of California, Berkeley, demonstrated that the predictions were actually true. So the idea of entanglement, or as a Buddhist would say, separation is an illusion, at least some of the time. That is, things are connected to a greater extent than you would expect, especially our consciousness. So I would say that my take on that is that there is certainly separation between bodies or water glasses, but there's no separation between consciousness of different people. And we know that's true. That's not a metaphysical principle. Because in our 2 decades of work at Stanford Research Institute, we did many hundreds of experiments, and we know from our data, and the CIA agrees with us, that it's no harder to describe what's going on in China or the Soviet Union than it is to describe what's across the street. So increasing the distance by 10,000 times in no way diminishes the accuracy or reliability. That's what you mean by a non-local phenomenon.
Right. Now, a concept like entanglement also has this sort of feeling of connection and love. And one of your subtitles is Lasers and Love. Why did you choose that as a subtitle? Lasers kind of tend to scare people.
Well, lasers shouldn't scare people. Everybody's seen lasers now at the checkout counter of the supermarket.
Yeah, but I think they also feel with holograms you can do deceptive things. I think Al Gore made a presentation once, and people listened to it, and at the end he disappeared, and people were just looking at a hologram of him. And so there's that feeling of being fooled. And I think in traditional lore, the idea is that clairvoyance or clairaudience, it's one of my first teachers, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, said that the future casts itself on the hearts of the pure. so that it takes a certain amount of human development, worthiness for this type of power, because it is a power. If you can see what's happening in China, it seems this doesn't naturally appear typically, and our schools aren't really geared for these kinds of...
Psychic ability does naturally appear unless you do something to extinguish it.
Okay, so the argument might be in that case that our education diminishes these abilities.
That's right. In the ancient literature, at the time of Christ, there was a big Buddhist monograph, encyclopedia of Buddhism called the Flower Ornament Scripture, the big 1,500-page book that's available at your bookstore near you. And they have lots of chants and lots of meditation. And eventually you get to what they call the super knowledge section, where they talk about looking into the distance, looking into the future. There is no contradiction about looking into the future, because the future and the past and the present are all infinite in extent in space-time. So everything is, as the Buddhists would say, dependently co-arising. So it's to be expected that aspects of the future will affect the past.
Right.
Now, this was all understood at the time of Christ in India. And they said that these powers are not supernatural, that any person with a quiet mind and a pure heart, as you say, is able to quiet their mind and experience what's in the distance or what's in the future. And that has been the Buddhist line. The Flower Ornament Sutra at the time of Christ said that. Patanjali wrote a whole book dealing with psychic powers. Patanjali was a Hindu shortly after the time of Christ.
I know the Patanjali Yoga Sutra as well, because it was part of the TM Cities program.
That's right.
To go into that.
And then Padmasambhava in the 800s wrote a book called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. And he said that a lot of suffering comes from our conditioning, where you believe what's true is what you're taught by your teachers and your president and television and the newspapers. If you take that as truth, then you're limited by your conditioning.
Right.
And your desire to name things and think that what you see are real. And he's talked about emptiness, which is the idea that things do exist, but they only have the meaning you give them. Everything you experience has only the meaning you give it. And Padmasambhava's invitation was to move from your conditioned television-based awareness to naked awareness, or naked experience, where you experience things as they are. You give up the story of who you think you are. All of us carry a business card,
right.
And we think who we are is what it says on the business card. And that leads to a lot of suffering.
I think, yeah, and there's a lot of fear for people to let go of the television reality, because they think that's what is giving them participation in the society, where that's the agreement about what reality is.
Yes.
So it takes a certain boldness.
All of these teachers say that psychic abilities are normal and natural, not something supernatural or weird. It's an ability we all have if you don't repress it.
If you don't repress it. Would you say it's also a function of people having the confidence, when you say in the darkened rooms when you were practicing and you realized you were more than your body, that people would have confidence in this, for lack of another term, soul experience, that they were more than how they see themselves as a member of that society?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was soulful. I think what happened, there's no religious association with psychic functioning at all. There's nothing to do with...
And yet you come to a compassionate viewpoint, though. You collaborate with J.J. Hurtak, a book, The End of Suffering, which seems to be the focus of religions.
A person can be interested in ameliorating suffering without having any invisible friends that you pray to. That is, a Buddhist, for example, doesn't believe in a creator of the universe.
Right.
or a god.
Which is an anathema to a lot of the Judeo-Christian.
Right, but
they would say that's horrifying. You don't believe in God.
But a Buddhist will devote his life to helping to end suffering.
Right.
So compassion is one of the two cardinal ideas. The idea of compassion and emptiness are the cardinal ideas in the Buddhist thought system,
right.
But it has nothing to do with the deity.
Now, your brother-in-law, Bobby Fischer, would you call him, because you're saying that you wanted to tell the story about the SeeEyeA, about relationships, about Bobby Fischer. Was he a compassionate person?
I would not say so.
No?
He was amusing. He was... one of the problems with President Bush is he suffered from an irony deficiency, that he wasn't aware when he was being absurd. Bobby Fischer had a very good sense of the absurd. He had a good sense of humor. When he was going in to play the World Chess Championship in Reykjavik, the interviewer Robert Frost asked him if he's studied the psychology of chess, and Bobby said, "I'm not interested in psychology, I'm only interested in good moves."
Right.
So he was not interested
But
in the nonsense.
Speaking of good moves, though, he had to do a lot of moves with with this government, right? Someone even recently told me, I don't know if this is so or not, he was questioning the Holocaust story. And eventually he became a person without a country. And you were talking even up until he was buried in Iceland, where they demanded that you have a cross by your grave. He had a chess piece of the king. So
that's a compilation of a lot of stories. He was living he played a match in 1992, a rematch of his world championship with Spassky, and Bobby, of course, won again. But George Bush I said that no one should trade with Yugoslavia because there was a war going on, and Bush didn't know what to do about Yugoslavia, so he said, "I know what I can do to help make things go better. I will declare Bobby Fischer persona non grata. That'll make the world a better place." So Bobby couldn't return to the U.S. after winning his chess match in Yugoslavia. So he then became a world citizen. He visited Hungary and stayed with Judith Polgar, who's the strongest woman player in the world. Then he went to Japan and lived with the head of the Japanese Chess Federation.
Right, no, you explain it so well.
And then he was in jail for 8 months in Japan because the American government pulled his passport as a punishment, and that rendered him stateless. So the Japanese, in cooperation with the American government, simply put him in jail until he could be extradited. Now, Bobby had a valid passport. He hadn't done anything. So the Americans just canceled his passport, and when he went to the Japanese Narita airport, they simply arrested him.
It just strikes me, though, as a person that intelligent has a certain orderliness in his life. And the way he was treated reminds me a bit of Ezra Pound, how he was also treated. And he talks about the value of of putting your own house in order and then everything else is in order. A lot of people now throughout the world are very critical of American foreign policy, and that at the end of the day it's just not smart not to recognize entanglement theory, you might call it, or love or compassion. Even though you say he wasn't compassionate, it still seems he was playing a chess game on a big level to win a certain move or to accomplish something.
Well,
he was a champion of,
yes,
of
he had
more
spatial
than just
visualization beyond any chess player who ever lived. He was the strongest player who there's ever been. In his run-up to the World Chess Championship, there was a candidates tournament where he had to play Mark Taimanov, who had been the Soviet champion, and they had a best-of-12 series, and usually there are many, many draws in such a series. And in the case where Bobby played Taimanov, Bobby won every game with a shutout. It was unprecedented. It's like my playing tennis with Roger Federer and every ball he would hit to me, I would miss. I would never get my racket even on the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Bobby did to Taimanov. He won every single game in the candidates tournament, and then he moved to the challengers tournament to the right to play the world champion, and he played Bent Larsen, who the grandmaster and champion of Denmark, an international grandmaster, and he again won that 6-0.
That's what
and
I
that has never happened in the history of chess.
Yes.
And probably will never happen
And
again.
yet, what an embarrassment that for America that we pushed him out. That's what I'm saying. The same thing with Ezra Pound. He's the greatest poet. Can the work that you did with the SeeEyeA, even though it's starting with remote viewing and these kinds of games...
Well, Paula, it's tough being a genius in any society.
You mean any country would have been critical because politicians have to... We were talking about the caste system, for example. You're saying the rich people are not doing any of the work, and I was...
There's Turing in England, as the fellow who broke the German code during World War II. Turing was a great hero. He designed the basis of all modern computers. Every computer still has elements that Turing designed, and he personally envisioned how to break the German Enigma code. And he was greatly celebrated during the Second World War. He was in charge of the whole Bletchley Park code-breaking thing. And after the war, in 1950, he was arrested for being a homosexual and put in prison and forced to take feminizing drugs, and then he killed himself.
Wow.
He saved tens of thousands of English lives by being able to read the German code. There should be a statue of him in Trafalgar Square next to Nelson's statue, but instead he was thrown into jail, like Oscar Wilde was thrown into jail.
We only have 1 minute left.
Yes.
After having written this book, what is the greatest benefit you got from it?
Well, the message that I'm trying to give people is to encourage them to get in touch with the part of themselves that's psychic. They're not limited in their perception to what they can see with their eyes, whether they have glasses or no glasses, but they can expand their awareness with their eyes shut and see what's in the distance and see what's in the future, and that is available to people. You don't have to give away your mind or eat porridge with the feet of your guru. You have the ability to see the distance and see the future.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. This is Paula Gloria, and this has been an episode Farther Down the Rabbit Hole with Russell Targ. I highly encourage you to read this book, Do You See What I See? Because I think we can all see more, and when we see more, we'll be more.
That's certainly true. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russell. Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. I'm especially happy to have a show today that I've been looking forward to for a long, long time. I have wanted to introduce my Manhattan audience to my sister, and that's Hella Tsaconas. So thank you for joining me, Hella.
Thank you.
And I had always envisioned that I wanted to do a nice studio shoot with you, and I always thought we would be doing it in the Manhattan Neighborhood Network studios on 59th Street, but it turns out that we're here in Palo Alto at the Media Center, and Becca is in the control room, and I'm going to be learning all about what's going on here in public access in Palo Alto. We've just had a show with Russell Targ, who headed up the SeeEyeA remote viewing program. He was the head of this project at Stanford Research Institute. And on that show, we had a lovely background of Stanford. So with my sister, with you, I wanted to share with my audience something that was so important to me, and that's colors. Do you want to tell people where you stand now with wardrobe consulting, and then I'll sort of share
what I do? Well, I wanted to make a comment. The show right before this that I was watching with Russell talking was covering so many incredibly interesting, deep topics. and he was referring to Buddhism in different points of the show, and talking about how we're more than just this body. And here I'm in a field that deals with people's bodies and their appearance. And I, over the years, get a lot of negative feedback and sarcastic questions. You do what? There's a lot of negativity about clothing and fashion. We hear about it in a way that's really programming people to feel
that
uncomfortable about themselves. The programming is something's wrong with them if they aren't adhering to a certain look that's put out there. Particularly for women, they talk a lot about age in terms of programming, cosmetic surgery, and altering different parts of the body in order to stay youthful. But I represent helping people tune into their authentic self. Doesn't matter what age, what color, what background, but if you tune into yourself and you're able to express that through your outerwear, you're communicating in an authentic, peaceful, harmonious way, and that's how people will respond to you.
Well, you know, I remember when I first got introduced to the whole idea of colors, and I know you've taken it farther since then, but even when I was young, I was very lacking in confidence about who my authentic self was.
With no surprise.
Yeah.
We're fed.
And I was at the Transcendental Meditation Center, and there was a lady, she was older than I was, and she sort of had that kind of outdoors look. And, you know, not like somebody who would be concerned with going shopping and putting a lot of attention on her fingernails and her hair. But she looked really together. And then one day she ripped out something like this.
And you responded to the togetherness.
Yeah.
It wasn't that she looked together. I'm very sensitive to this because this is so much
She had a
what
together
people
look.
think. But you felt good around her when you looked at her.
Yeah, she was pleasing to look at. And she didn't look like the kind of person that would fuss with that. And she took out something like this. I know these are your colors. And as soon as I saw it, I go, wow, what's that? And she said, these are colors that are harmonious to my particular coloring. So straight away I knew that there was something distinctive about the colors that she had and who she was. And so after that, she got me interested, because I thought if she could look that good, and then I wanted to know
without a lot of the superficial trappings.
Right.
In her case.
Right,
Yeah.
and so that's how I got into it. And then I found, once I knew which colors were better for me, I could sometimes pick up things on sale that people wouldn't even consider as that great a garment, but I knew that it would be a color that would work for me. And so I was able to achieve a really nice look with very little money.
And what was the response from people who looked at you when you had your colors?
Well, I remember at that time Maharishi was on the Merv Griffin show, so there were some teachers in the big centers that were making a lot of money, and I wasn't. I was in Berkeley, and Berkeley, you know, pretty much had the intellectuals a consistent interest. And so there were other ladies on these courses that had spent a lot more money than I had, and they were taking note that they liked what I was doing, and on these courses, they came from all over the country. But I was the one in the Bay Area that had access to this. So some were even thinking of flying to get the courses and the knowledge.
Something came to me when you first started that you film in Manhattan, and you wanted me to come to Manhattan to make a show, which I'll still do. But I come from Berkeley, and so there's that, again, I had a little bit of the Berkeley edge starting out in a defensive way, because in Berkeley, the intellect is considered most important, and we always talk about, or often refer to, professors having holes in their garments and so forth to prove that it doesn't matter what's outside, but the intellect is hard at work at all times, and that's most important. But of course, it's about harmony. And I was very inspired recently, and I will come back specifically to the colors in a minute, but I feel like I have this information that springs out of the colors and style lines and work that I've been doing for over 20 years. But I happened to hear on a national public radio station the very tail end of an interview with a famous food critic who worked for Gourmet for years. I don't remember her name, but it was just the perfect part I came in on. And they were asking her, are you recognized at restaurants? We heard that you go, well, she must have been, obviously, because here was the question. We heard that you go to extremes to wear disguises so people don't know who you are when you're in a restaurant, and is that really necessary? And she said, well, I never did put disguises on before because I didn't, number one, care about fashion or clothes. People should see me for who I am, and who cares about that? But then I did start to disguise myself as I got more and more famous, and I didn't want to influence people around me, especially the restaurant owners. So I started wearing a variety of disguises, and she said, what I discovered was you are what you appear to be. You're immediately treated differently, instantly, subliminally. You know the expression, you are what you eat. So she said it was absolutely fascinating how people treated her when she went bleach blonde versus when she once dressed exactly like her mother, and that was scary to her, the way she was treated. But it was really interesting because it was a complete going in with no preconceived ideas that she would be treated that way. So,
well, the idea that I got from the colors is that if you wear colors that are harmonious to your body, each individual body is put together perfectly. It has a vibration to it, a color vibration, and you're just
you want to allow that to come through to your environment.
Right.
So then your being and energy is perceived and experienced in a way that's
authentic.
Authentic.
Yeah.
And authentic means harmonious, and ultimately that's a contribution to a better society and environment.
But I'm curious, she was disguising herself because she wanted her privacy, or just
no, because then the food critics might go out and make a really special meal and give it to her, and she'll give them 4-star ratings.
Oh,
treat her
I
differently.
see.
You try to be like me going into. I often don't say what I do when I go into stores.
I see.
Because they'll treat me differently. Either they'll be defensive, worried about what I'm going to say, or cater to me, so I'll bring them more business. But the colors also started quite a long time ago, and there's different people who or analyze colors one-on-one. But the group that I have found most authentic and thorough is personal style counselors. They've been in business 45 years.
Didn't Susan Cahill start in the Palo Alto area?
Exactly. I was thinking about her.
Wow.
I never met her, but
Her ghost.
she had the genius to intuit color and a human being and color found in nature having a lot of parallels. So she started something called Seasons, and it became a very popular thing in the 70s. And then later, a little superficial. People said, well, Hella's a winter type, so she has dark hair and fair skin. That's so easy and so generalized, but there's nuances to people's coloring. It's not just one thing, but Suzanne Cagill's genius was giving a very clear image through nature of somebody's body. Also body type comes up, that's another subject, structure, but sticking with color expression parallel to nature. And basically we're born with a certain color and value in our hair, skin, and eyes, and we repeat that in our outerwear.
I remember you said that my mother and I, our mother, she's more like my coloring. So until you understood that your coloring was distinctive.
Right, I was the black sheep.
Right.
And my mother and Paula had her colors done. I feel like I'm supposed to look into the camera but to connect. So I didn't want to have my colors done because I thought I'd be just the same, so my mom could save money and I'd wear the similar colors. But when I had them done, it was so dramatically different. And it helped me because I really was a black sheep. I had a strange name. I had extreme coloring, and it was the 60s, and it was all about tan skin and blondes and so forth. So at any age and in any situation, it's nice to be able to have some tools to help us express who we are so we can get on with important things. So appearance is just as important as what we're doing in our life, in our sense of purpose, so it can be perceived and we can move along.
So it's like setting the right tone or the right chord.
It's the
And then
precious
everything
body.
harmonizes.
It's that expression and honoring that and going forward. Something I often tell people when they want to apply their colors, and where are you going and what do you want to communicate? Today I thought about it. I thought I'm just going to be playful. Somebody named Karl Lagerfeld, who's a very famous and actually quite a genius in the fashion world. And this is a jacket, an old jacket that he did, which in the old days would be perceived as kind of Davies Symphony Hall, or very conservative. But so what? There's color, there's playfulness. I felt like the holidays are coming up. Paula's in color, and I wanted to convey and communicate an easygoingness and kind of a celebration too.
Yeah, my primary thing is what, angelic?
Well, your coloring is what would be called lively bright, colors mixed with white, and then a subtle blended quality, a little bit of a grayed down effect.
Right.
And then that's the color, and then the style line's based on Paula's eyes, shape, bone structure, proportions, hands. It's
That
very,
chubby cherub look.
well, we'll have a little bit of that in the family. And so the clothing and the style lines, which is crucial when people study clothing, is how something is cut and fit. So for you, it would be more ethereal in effect and feeling. Something called it more of an angelic effect. I get a little bit afraid of too many categories, but it's the feeling.
Yeah, I know.
And the tool.
No, but it's true. I love sparkly things. And I remember, Russell told me that when he first met me, I was wearing a sari. I don't even remember. But I do know I did like to wear silk saris and things that sparkle. And they say older women shouldn't wear those sparkly things. But I still do it because it makes me happy.
Well, and then you wear
know?
what feels good. I mean, it's all about tuning in the quiet mind. And again, it was the talk before was a quiet mind and a pure heart. We apply that to everything
right
in our life. So the quiet mind and pure heart, that's a natural feeling for you to express.
I actually, I don't think I read it on the show, but before we started the show, I read a quote from Ezra Pound where he was talking about, and one orderly and humane individual can have that harmony spread throughout society, because he was translating Confucius.
And I felt that when I looked at that person that you mentioned that inspired you to have your colors done when I saw her.
Do you remember her name? I can't remember.
Suzanne. I can't remember
Yeah.
completely. But she was a rather scary woman when she spoke. But her appearance made it easier to take, and then it was even a pleasure to be around her. I wanted to say something.
And her
else.
harmony and colors were very different from ours.
Completely different.
She was a professor's wife, and she did a lot of nature walks. She was a rich, earthy rich type
Right,
that really
right.
liked to go out and...
And she probably had a square face, stronger hands, and that would be translated in a sturdier type of clothing or textured clothing. I'm very different from Paula in that certainly my coloring is different, but my structure, or my bone structure, I would be more of a classic type. And so there'd be more balance. The face is an oval, evenly divided, although you have aspects of that too. But a sari can be classic as well.
Yeah.
But it's the way that it's made in terms of fabric and color, and is there sparkle versus just satin.
You know, I remember in India there was a lady who got a master's degree, and she was studying saris. And she discovered with her surveys that women felt when they wore a sari in the workplace, there was less sexual harassment. And so she was, because India at that
was red.
Well, I don't know what the color was, but
I mean, that's an
that's the
important thing
romantic
too.
color.
Well,
yeah. But the point was, that was some years ago. I was in a train, maybe 15 years ago, where I had this conversation. So there was India, a country that was sort of struggling with how to come into the modern world, and yet when they really tuned in, they realized that certain traditional things they really liked.
Well, I got onto the red idea, and I was reading a book. A lot of people will know Simon Doonan, who is, I believe I'm saying his name right, he's an extremely creative force in New York, and he's known for his window dressing at Barney's in New York. He's written several books. And I was just reading over them, and he's talked about the importance of individuality, and he worries about women becoming too much into the Barbie doll, things I talked about earlier that I don't even want to dwell on the negative. And to get away from that, not that there's anything wrong
Did he
with
actually
wanting
use the
to
word
live.
slut?
Oh yeah, he says say no to hoe and yes to, I don't know, it wasn't success, but it was about yes to the person and the individual.
Right.
But he talked about Diana Vreeland, who was a brilliant creative force for Vogue magazine and editor, and a rather homely woman, but she had such a, I mean, when I say homely, kind of scary and bird-like, but the way she carried herself and the authenticity made her very available to people.
Right.
And she wasn't afraid. But she said everybody should have a little vulgarity in their dress. And that creates the interest, but you have to be careful what you mean by vulgarity. It's not slut and hoe,
Right.
but maybe celebration would be a better word,
Right.
or a twist, or something
Right.
we used to call color violation, a little off.
Right.
And
A little stimulating challenge,
yeah,
maybe.
or art,
Yeah.
a creative force that you feel. And there was vulgarity, but there was also the color red he talked about, that it absolutely is a stimulating color, and to be wary, if you read that, if you wear that, you'll steal the show.
Mm-hmm. And do you want that much responsibility?
Again, where are you going and what do you want to communicate?
Right.
Why not wear an incredible red dress, whether it's satin or sparkly, on your birthday, because you want to communicate that energy, female, not just sexuality, but energy, the height of femininity.
But I always heard that it was a very romantic color, red. So
If you take it, there's what we call the first reds, which are extremely powerful. You wear carefully. I don't know how much the camera picks up, and there's also plastic reflecting. These would be very strong for me, a first red.
Right.
But if I wanted to be more approachable, and so people could focus on me, like in a job situation, you wouldn't want to wear a first red, but you'd go down to a less intense red that still suits the person towards, say, the ones mixed with more white, pink effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more youthful, but not as threatening.
Now, I remember learning that pink would make women more feminine, but also men more masculine. So it's bringing out
Not pink, red.
red?
Red makes men more this is a red. It's just added more white.
Oh, you don't call it
It actually makes you a little more youthful and girlish.
When it's got the white in it?
Right. So it would make a man more boyish
I see.
when it's the intensity is taken down. But that's in accordance with each person's coloring.
What about eye colors? But because I'm worried
That's
time
my
always runs away, and that's such an interesting color. I thought that was such an ugly color when I first got it. I have green eyes.
Well,
and when I put on that color,
it's because eye colors, what we call eye colors or eye extensions,
put it up to your face.
or now
'cause
we
they can-
call them calm, because when you're wearing something that reflects the eyes, the tendency that it has on you, who's wearing it, and the person observing you, it's very calming and centering. Eyes are windows to the soul. And the way that they're arrived at or chosen is it's a grayed down version of your eye color. It's not an exact, but it's a reflection of the eyes. It's a way of enhancing the eyes when you wear them.
Now, when you pick up eyeshadow, should it be those colors or
I don't
not?
particularly care for color on the eyes that much. A little bit. You're in harmony with your eyes a little bit.
Yeah, but I've always noticed I'm never as excited when I have my eye color on.
Because
actually-
it's so blended.
Maybe, yeah.
For what you do is a split complementary. If you wore purple, or even a tiny bit of purple around the eyes, it's opposite on the color wheel,
Right.
so they'll really, really stand out.
So that I heard that with when I first got into this, it was my dramatic, the color that contrasted with
that
my eyes.
contrasts everything.
Yeah.
There's something called a powerful or a dramatic color. If you want to stand up and speak in a room of 500 people, you'd put on a dramatic color near your face. It would just be a top or a whole outfit. Doesn't matter. But what it's doing, it's highlighting your hair color, your skin tone, and your eyes just all at once. It's just like you're on stage taking charge, which is a very different effect than red. Red, you get tired of looking at. Although a very interesting thing is red's worn a lot on television and with newscasters. The red tie. Nancy Reagan's associated with the red dress. It gets kind of tiring, but it reads well on camera, by the way.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
Red's
many-
also the color associated with the Divine Mother in India and the Shakti worship. And actually sacrifices. That
Right.
little dot that they would put
Right.
actually harkens back to being protected.
I think there was something in early Christianity with red, and the Virgin Mother too, if I'm not mistaken.
I think in the Orthodox religion, the Virgin Mary will be in red, but in the Catholic version, she's never in red. And
then
there's a stigma against red, because we interviewed the man who saw the Virgin Mary when he was 7 years old in the Bronx, and she came down for 16 days, and on the 16th day, 30,000 people were gathered. So there were healings happening, and people were heartbroken. Mothers had lost their sons after World War II, and this little boy, this is all happening so quickly. So every day he said that she came down, she wore a different color. And having come back from India, I was just saying, oh, you know, she was wearing purple and red and blue. And, oh, no, never red. Never red, he said.
Interesting.
And I thought, wow, you know.
She was smart.
Well,
she wouldn't be taken seriously.
Whether she wore red or not, I thought, isn't that interesting that in this culture we shy away that the revered and the sacred and the spiritual couldn't possibly be red.
But that wasn't this culture, that was Europe. You mean
Well, no,
Western civilization?
in India is just this really colorful country. It's just
But
it's just
what's
so
the red
alive.
associated with India is
Oh no, here I think it's associated with, you know, over-sexuality and prostitutes and, you know, and garishness.
I think color is a universal response, though. Maybe they're not as
well, maybe then maybe
such
we're
an issue.
maybe that's our conditioning then. Maybe it's
Well,
what,
here's
like what
something,
Russell was
when I
talking
would-
about ESP. You know, maybe people have it naturally.
I think it's more scientific, actually.
Okay.
When I had an art class at Mills College, I remember my art teacher, this is the practice of art, he talked about yellow and why it was not a very popular color. And apparently yellow, and Russell might know about this, it creates a quick, rapid fire in the eye when it's perceiving that color, which can be uncomfortable or too much. And yet yellow is the color of joy and sunflower and the sun, but perceiving it long periods of time apparently makes the eye somewhat tired.
Wow. It's an interesting study.
It really is.
You know, Dr. Joe Shapiro, who does some really important work with vision therapy, he has this machine that's a very old machine, and he puts, you know, light comes down a tube, and he puts different colors, you know, different films, and by looking at these for 20 minutes, it has a very balancing effect. Like, you actually would use red, now that I think about it, to stimulate. If things are too sluggish, you use the blues for subduing. And he can even cure things like, although he doesn't set out to do this, he's an ophthalmologist, I think. Edema, swelling in the body, can be influenced by the vision. So it shows the effect of color.
And what the nervous system is reacting to, or the vibration of color. I think another universal example would be purple. That's sort of in your realm, isn't it? Well, we have some purple here. Isn't that spiritual, regal?
Yeah, so they say. We only have 5 minutes left. How would you like to use the last parts?
Well, let's see.
To relay what you're doing? Or
Any questions from the audience? Does Russell have any questions? A little interactive?
3
here?
minutes now.
Oh, okay. Do you have a question, seriously? Could that be sort of an informal call-in? Or am I putting you on the spot? I'm only curious because...
The question I would have is...
You knew it.
I think it's important to emphasize how important it is. The first thing that you said in the program, that people are perceived for what they're wearing, whether they like it or not.
That's good.
A person can say that I'm not going to wear a costume. I want to wear whatever I am. I'll be who I am. And they may suffer a lot from that and not realize it, because the society at large profoundly judges people by the way they appear. And if, especially a young person, if they want to be successful, they should go with the program as long as they're still being judged by older people. If they want to be successful, they can fight some other battle, but not fight the battle of first impressions.
That's a good point.
It is.
You want to recap?
Crucial. Well, and that's why I talk about where are you going and what do you want to communicate. If you're going to a job...
repeat the question. we have 1 minute.
Oh, okay. Where are you going and what do you want to communicate? That's my message, and that's what I try to help people achieve. If you're going to a job interview with Bank of America or a financial institute, you tend to still dress conservatively to give a sense of blending in almost, or I don't want to say selling out, that gets political, I don't mean it totally like that. But if you do want to go for an interview to be a stripper, you'd certainly want to be provocative in your dress. And
right.
So where are you going? What do you want to communicate?
Right. You don't realize, but Russell was a little bit off mic. Russell Targ had just brought up the point that why go over the hurdle if first impression is a reality? You know, just
embrace it and keep moving.
Embrace it and then carry on.
Progress, yeah.
And you like to have young people too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
In your practice.
That's all people.
How do people reach you?
They reach me on my website, which is Hella Personal Style, isn't it? I've changed it a few times. Hella Personal Style.
That's great.
And I'm in Berkeley.
And for those of you who are watching this in Manhattan, because I'm so eager to show what public access is doing here in Palo Alto, I'll be playing this in Manhattan. You can always reach me at rabbitholecentral@earthlink.net. And I'm hoping to bring Hella to Manhattan. And I'm hoping to come back to Palo Alto and work more with the Media Center and see if we can get some call-ins and stir things up. And stay tuned for our next show, because we're going to bring Russell Targ on and just sort of go into these topics about being more than our body by honoring the body, starting with that.
Perfect.
So thank you for joining me, Hella.
Thank you. Just getting warmed up.
Right, warmed up is right. Okay, so I think we are going out on that, or sometimes we don't go out. We just finish up with some last minutes. You can put credits on it. My name is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. I'm especially happy that I've been able to go into topics more deeply with the author of the book, Do You See What I See? Because I have a great interest in perception, and I have a great interest in the development of consciousness and the development of society. I'm especially pleased that I'm sitting here at the Media Center, which is 900 San Antonio, which is the public access studios for the Palo Alto area. So, and I've just finished a show with Russell Targ, the author of this book, and also with my sister Hella Tsaconas, whose wardrobe consulting business outside of Berkeley. She was able to explain a little bit better, and I hope to have you in New York, and we'll do it more.
Oh yeah, I love it.
So thanks for joining me again, and thank you, Russell, for
Happy to be with you.
For venturing on this third show. In this book that Russell wrote, it's called Memoirs of a Blind Biker, and I was very intrigued how somebody who was legally blind could be riding a motorcycle. And I often have as a guest on my show Carl Pearson, who's an attorney, who's pretty aware of what's going on in many ways with the demise of our economy, and he comes up with workaround solutions. And I love having him as a guest. And I felt that you were also relaying a lot of workaround solutions to have a richer and more rewarding life, and also to include more people. So I wanted to have you on a show with my sister, and you've heard what she's involved with wardrobe consulting, and being from Berkeley, she expressed that there's sometimes a stigma against being concerned with the outer, that it's not intellectually rigorous to think that your body matters. And then tie it in with the comment that you made that when you were having these long practices of developing your psychic abilities, and you spent more time with your eyes closed than most people, that you realized ultimately you're more than your body, and that the key to unlock the suffering that we as individuals and humanity goes through can be addressed. We can have a key to suffering, to alleviate it.
Well, I'm very sympathetic with Hella's idea that we shouldn't fight the system. That is, although we, as you mentioned just now, you should express your independence, but not necessarily at the risk of losing your job.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I was very sympathetic is when you were describing that if you're going to get a job for the Bank of America, you shouldn't show up as a stripper.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you want to be a free spirit and wear what you want to wear, you have to, it's common expression now, you only get one chance for a first impression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a very brilliant girlfriend at one point in my life, and she was an independent spirit and felt that she could do anything. She had a PhD in physics and studied philosophy, and if she was applying for a job, she'd wear any damn thing she wanted to wear, and they would judge her by her ability, and that famously did not work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because they would look at her and say, aha, this, I see a slob walking into my office, and they would talk to her, and then they would discover that she's a brilliant slob, but she had to climb out of such a hole that it was extremely self-defeating.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a good strategy.
I have to put a very important point in, and that's why my business is hella personal style, personal, about the personal and the individual. You don't want to think you have to sell out by putting a suit on, or even, again, the example of a stripper, if you're going to a job interview and that's what your intention is. Some way that you can still keep your individual quality. Could be expressed through a color choice, but still within a structure that is something that the onlooker can accept and not be distracted by, say, if there's an angry attitude. When someone has a brilliant mind, there may be something so extremely inappropriate the way they're dressing, they're distracting in a wrong way, or a way that's not going to...
I think it's important to try and fit in and not call attention to yourself by what you're wearing. I worked at Lockheed for 12 years.
But not to lose the spirit of who you are.
Yes, I agree
anxious
with that.
To say
so
that.
At Lockheed, everybody wore a suit. That's
Mm-hmm.
what people were wearing.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't want to call attention to yourself, you wanted to look more or less like a Lockheed engineer. My next job was with a small startup created by Paul Allen, and I, for the first time in my life, was the oldest person in the organization, and I was aware from visiting that company that everyone wore jeans. That was the uniform there.
Mm-hmm.
The uniform.
So I had to sort of sell out, get rid of my nice wool slacks, and order the very first pair of jeans in my entire life so I could fit in and look like a member of the team.
Well, that troubles me a little bit that you felt sold out.
Well, I'm just...
but you're being honest. Well,
No, but he liked his...
But did you enjoy the experience of the jeans?
Oh, it was fine. As I was not attached to it. I thought it was amusing.
Because everything I stand for isn't selling out. It's where you're going, what you want to communicate, and adjusting accordingly. In other words, if you go back and put the suits on in the suit industry, or where they feel more comfortable in structured suits, where onlookers are going to feel their money is safe with them and trustworthy, you could have a tie in a great color that still expresses yourself, your individual self, your eye color. Only you have that eye color.
Well, when I went for a job interview with Paul Allen, who's one of the richest people in America, and I was aware that everybody in the room was going to be wearing polo shirts and jeans,
Mm-hmm.
I did not want to be the weird guy from Lockheed showing up in a suit. That'd be stupid.
Yeah.
It was bad enough I was trying to sell him sacramental software.
Mm-hmm.
I had a program to create a software program that would help you be psychic.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to have any impediment. I didn't want to create an artificial barrier by my weird clothes, jacket and tie. I wanted to be able to communicate my weird idea without being interfered
Distracted.
with inappropriate clothes.
Speaking of that, Hella won't understand this because she didn't see that moving men who stare at goats.
I read the description.
But they were talking about one man that was starting the New Earth Army,
Yes.
And you were telling me in the car, what were you saying about that? It was more true than people
Well,
realize.
there's more truth to this crazy. The Man Who Stares at Ghosts is a comedy, but interwoven in that are ideas from we had a 25-year program doing psychic stuff for the government. We were looking into the distance, looking into the future, investigating whether we could affect people's mind at a distance. The Soviets were very interested in remote behavior modification. It's hard to be psychic in Russia. You have to be free and open, as you described, with an open heart and feel safe. In Buddhism, you talk about the Sangha, which is your spiritual community where it's safe to be psychic and safe to be spiritual. And we had very, very good success with psychic functioning in the U.S. I found many, many people who could accurately and reliably describe what was going on in Iran or Russia or China or wherever. But the Soviets were not able to do that. Remote viewing was not a successful project in the Soviet Union, but they were good at things like remote strangulation and remote behavior modification.
Really? Because what about that book, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain? I thought they were very
They were looking at, this was Ostrander and Schroeder in 1970. It was a very influential book. They were very interested in psychic stuff, and in Russia everybody has a psychic grandmother. And there was a lot of investigation going on in different places, but they were not able to harness psychic functioning to the extent we could do at Stanford Research Institute.
Well, I imagine there's a lot of subliminal work involved in that, correct?
You have to feel free. You can't beat somebody into being psychic or harass them or even pay them. That you can't have higher salaries for the better psychics. The more hits you get, the more money we give you. That does not work.
Feeling free meaning trust?
You have to feel trust and safe. That is, in my remote viewing workshops, I will often stand in front of a group of people, some of whom are skeptics, some of whom are receptive, and tell them I have an object that I brought for them to describe, and they have no idea what I want them to do or what the object could be. But I make it so believable that this is not an ESP test. I expect them to be successful. This is an ordinary ability. Hundreds of people have done this. If you just quiet your mind and describe the surprising image that appears in your awareness, you can't be wrong, because all I want you to do is describe what appears in your awareness. So I frame it in a way that is very easy to do. I'm not asking you to do anything unusual. I'm not testing you, and that's very successful.
It'd be nice if the education system had that approach.
Well, that's what we had on our last show, that could have been a whole show in itself, when you were saying psychic ability is natural, so it's not something
Well, it's
unusual.
how to tune into it.
That's right. For thousands of years, the Buddhists have been writing books saying this is not a supernatural ability.
Right.
There's nothing supernatural about it. It's an ordinary ability. We all have this capability to see into the distance of the future. It can be repressed because of society.
Sure.
We all are victims of our conditioning, and the Buddhist urge is to move from conditioned awareness, where you're limited by the story of who you think you are, to move into this spacious realm where you're free and flexible and joyful and loving and are able to not devote a lot of energy to promulgating your story. You just become a spacious person.
Do you think we've been programmed, that's kind of a strong word, but not encouraged to tune into this so society would be easier to control?
Oh yeah, we can
Well,
still
yeah.
smell the stench of the burning witches. It's frightening to be psychic,
Right.
because they burn them for hundreds of years all over the world,
So-
including America.
So, in other words, if you do develop these abilities, you keep it quiet?
Well, that's what you're
Say?
programmed to
You're
do.
programmed?
Well, we're
There's
not.
all these psychic movies, Dreaming of Jeannie and Resurrection are the two that come to mind. Somebody develops psychic or phenomenon is another
It's
one.
always negative and scary.
People develop psychic ability, they demonstrate them on screen, and
I have
then
a
they
question.
lose their husband, they're run out of town.
That's the question I had for you.
So the films show ESP, and they show how society is going to punish you for it.
That's interesting.
My question is, I hope this doesn't sound corny, but it really, this person name, can I give you a famous name from TV, John Edwards, Crossing Over? He's all about people, he helps people deal with sudden deaths in the family, and he seems very compassionate and honorable to me, and I was curious. Do you have any opinion on that? I'm not a TV fan, so that's why I'm a little torn even
Is
asking
Edwards
you.
a person in contact with deceased people? He's a channeler? Or
Energy. And I always feel good after I hear him, and a friend of mine said, oh, for God's sakes, Hella, you know. But I couldn't deny the good feeling I had, and it seemed he was doing some good.
Well, I have not seen his show,
okay.
but I understand that he certainly makes people feel good.
Yeah.
It's a call-in show where people will say,
studio audience
I just
stuff.
lost my Aunt Bertha.
You're right.
He says, oh yeah, Aunt Bertha's here, and
Yeah.
she still loves you and wishes you well. And
Yeah, but in a, maybe the child in me responds to it, or it's a sign we need more of that in our world, authentic, or we tune in ourselves, learn how to tune in ourselves.
Do you think you need a great strength to be authentic, that maybe your wardrobe consulting helps you to go along with the harmony of your body, or maybe your workshops for developing remote viewing empowers people that they know, wow,
Oh, yeah.
I can figure this out?
I see it immediately.
So I'm not as...
They actually often know, but they need or to have the support there. They already say that, really, I feel good in that, I relate to that. I'm almost not even there. I mean, actually I'm proud when you get to that point where you can quietly support them and they're making a choice that works.
Speaking of
without saying what's right and wrong.
Right. Speaking of that not even being there, the reason I wanted you to do a show together and surprising you both, what I'm going to bring up is my sister had a spontaneous levitation experience. And when you told me about this, at that time I had been in the TM Transcendental Meditation Cities program, and it involved a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time, and you were probably interested. But
I was interested, yeah, and I was under a lot of stress.
And you were going to
School.
Mills College too. And the spaciousness that Russell's describing, can you tell him and the viewers
What the experience was like when I
Yeah.
had the levitation experience?
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely a situation where I came home, I was very upset, I had term papers and lots of things on my mind. And so the atmosphere was really charged and unhappy, but I sat down to meditate. I've been a TM meditator for years, and I sat down and closed my eyes and started to meditate, and had a tremendous sense of deep silence. It sounds a bit, kind of hang with me here on some of the adjectives, because it sounds like, yeah, I've heard that before, but a definite sense of I wasn't Hella at all, but I was energy, and there was joy with that. There was a sense of freedom, that I was not the small self, as we call it, the big self, meaning the absolute all around us, and the individual called Hella. It was a complete universal connection of everything around me and joy with it. And then I had a physical body experience of not levitating like you'd see in the movies, hovering there, but more of a hopping sense. They talked about that in the TM cities where people would hop and people would say, well, that's not flying. I don't know what it was, but it came together in such a way that it was not about the individual. It was a beautiful...
And I remember you say what had burdened you so much, you know, the term papers, all of that seemed to sort of
It
recede
went
away.
completely. No, it was complete
And so when you were
peacefulness.
talking about this freedom feeling, Russell,
It was happening in a quiet time when the
Yeah.
mind was settling, and I believe the heart was pure, and it was all opening that way. And I understood everything in that moment. And it wasn't dramatic. wasn't a flashy dramatic thing. It was tremendously peaceful
And later on,
and
when
joyful.
she actually got the instruction, I asked her, I said, well, Hella, which was better, you know, when you did it spontaneously or when it was learned? And
yeah, spontaneously. Also, I was alone.
but I think we don't, in this society, we don't generally have this type of knowledge around. It is considered still strange, and you probably didn't talk about it much.
But I did, but even then the instructors would come in and sort of check my meditation, because certainly that couldn't have happened. They had a bureaucracy in themselves.
Right.
I mean, I think I got a lot out of TM, as I did with the colors. But I think they were afraid of it too. They didn't know.
So here we are needing this strength to kind of get out of our society, and yet our society's longing for what we can bring back to it.
Well, I think psychic abilities are readily available. And one of my jobs and what we did at SRI is give people permission. We had sort of the SRI logo. It says it's okay with Stanford Research Institute for you to be psychic. In fact, we expect you to be psychic. And with that kind of push and permission, people found it easier.
Really?
In recent years, television programs have been more positive. There are more programs about angels and mediums and time travel, where you don't kill off the psychic at the end. Another bad film is Suspect Zero with Ben Kingsley, a very skillful film about remote viewing, and they unnecessarily kill off the remote viewer at the end, which is really the Hollywood paradigm. There are many, many films where the psychic is punished at the end, but I think that we're overcoming that as though...
We're trying to keep the people happy. We'll give you a little bit, like alternative medicine. People want something else, so let's throw them this for a while.
Well, I'm encouraged that films like The Men Who Stare at Goats and the time travel films and the angel films that are on television now show a changing worldview in America that is becoming more
Was Men That Stare at Goats a community, a comedy?
It's as though we're being prepared for a new acceptance of psychic phenomena.
But even though Men Who Stare at Goats was a comedy, was that laughing at the and
you don't care as long as it warms people up to the ideas?
It's like no criticism is bad criticism?
It's basically a goofy film, but you get the idea that some people are actually doing psychic stuff in that film.
I like the what not to wear is goofy, but they do something.
An example would be, they wouldn't make a film like that if there was no truth, if there wasn't something like a psychic core behind it. And in fact, there was a psychic core. That is, we had 24 people at Fort Meade learning to do remote viewing, and another 24 at SRI working for the CIA. So there really was a psychic core. There's no doubt about it.
Did you define remote viewing very well?
No.
I think the audience would want to know.
Remote viewing is an ability we all have to experience and describe what's happening in a distant place or at a distant time. So we can quiet our mind and see or experience what's happening far away, or even where you've lost your car keys or your term paper. You can quiet your mind and visualize what the answer is going to look like and describe what you see without naming it. Naming is the enemy of psychic functioning.
Could you give another example? The car keys, but maybe an additional one?
But I think it could get really complex. Like I was saying to you, Sanjay in the Bhagavad Gita was informing the king how the battle was taking place from a remote location.
Yes. Well, we described lots of things. We were a Soviet reconnaissance plane full of code books crashed in Africa. And we then had a race with the Russians to see who could find the airplane. And we won just by remote viewing, working with Joe McMoneagle. We drew a map of Africa, and he was able to visualize the airplane, where it would be found, see the mountains to the west and the river to the right, and the airplane would be found at a village between the river and the mountains. And what I find is the people who are most successful at being psychic, people like Joe McMoneagle, Hella Hammett, Pat Price, and Ingo Swann are all quite intelligent, self-confident, outgoing people. That is, all these people are somewhat extroverted, bigger than life,
Dramatic types.
confident, dramatic people, and it's their...
You mean a milk toast won't be able to do this?
No, it's hard for the milquetoast to be psychic because there's a lot of negative reinforcement in society. The people who are psychic...
I see what you're saying.
Have to overcome social stigma
That's
against
right.
them?
The people who are psychic have already decided that they're okay at some higher level.
What did you say was something that kills the process? Naming names?
Your desire to
You meant-
name things. If you think that ESP is reading off the serial number on your dollar bill,
Oh, I see.
then you're not
yeah.
going to be able to do
Because I was
that.
thinking keys is naming something, car keys, but I see.
I mean, car key,
Yeah.
it's like,
Can
where
you-
did I've looked everywhere, where are my car keys? I can't find them. Or once a woman called me where I'd given a talk in fashionable Atherton, north of Palo Alto, and the next day the hostess called me and said, I've lost my tennis bracelet. My husband will kill me if I can't find it. And I said, well, I can help you, but I don't know what a tennis bracelet is. So she described to me that she had this platinum circlet set with diamonds, and I visualized this sparkly thing, and then I saw 2 square posts set in the grass. And I said, someplace on your estate, are there 2 4x4s just set in the grass, painted white? And she said, yes, near the back door by the roadway. And I said, I think you'll find it there. And I held the phone. She called me and I just turned away from the computer screen where I was doing something exceptionally boring. So I just turned from the screen, talked to her, and within 5 minutes she came back and said, thank you very much. She didn't say, how can I thank you? How can I reward you?
Was there
But
anger there?
No.
I'm teasing
no,
you.
No, but I...
Can you do
You mean
harm
it was
with
that-
But I,
you mean it
but I
was
found
that-
it for her.
You mean it was that natural?
Yes.
Oh, I'm
Find at
sorry,
the
I missed the
moments,
fine point.
everything came
I
together.
just was
Can you-
doing a spreadsheet for a big program that I had. And I just turned away from the computer, closed my eyes, and what came to view was not, it's in your backyard, because I didn't know if it's in her backyard. Well, I was focusing on where will it be found? Where will the tennis bracelet be found? That's my question. And what came to view was these 2 4x4s painted white. And she was able to tell me where it was.
Can you do harm with remote viewing?
That's what the fear of men who stare at goats is they were killing goats, and that's why people say,
Well,
oh,
remote
this-
viewing is inflowing information, so you can't really do harm.
I see.
You could do inappropriate spying, but you can't harm anybody. You can't harm anybody with remote viewing any more than you can harm anybody with ordinary vision.
I see.
So
Yeah.
what they were doing with the goats then wasn't remote viewing.
No, that would be outflowing
That's something
your
else.
harmful intention.
Or
Do you have
intention.
any comments on that Fort Meade or that terrible massacre? That I mean, I don't want to get political,
Oh,
particularly.
Fort Hood?
Yeah. And if it.
Well, that's still under investigation.
Okay, so don't.
That it's the guy had obviously become a religious fanatic, and you're always in trouble when God tells you to do things. It's-
Unless he was a patsy, but I don't know enough about it.
Do you think, Russell, with all your work and experience and, the behind the Iron Curtain and freedom, and that you can resolve war or get to the basis? I mean, that experience when you said, I'm not the body, in some ways, I think Sigmund Freud said at the end of his life, it was like his organs were competing for which one would give up the ghost
Oh,
first.
I don't think you can resolve war until you resolve greed.
Okay, can
I mean,
remote... can
there have always been wars. Whenever, people tried to, when the agriculture was successful 10,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherers made war on the farmers because the farmers had a lot of stuff and the hunter-gatherers had nothing. So whenever there's a big disparity between people who have enough to eat and people who don't have enough to eat, you have a war.
Yeah,
Needs.
I think...
We've done that experiment.
Yeah, we're in our last minute. I think the last thing I'd like to leave people with is that remote viewing and developing our abilities of perception are powerful abilities, and we can start to ascertain and see things more clearly, what we want to change or help or assist. It could be killing a goat, or it could be sending a blessing of goodwill and hope, and then going out and helping people.
Well, I think it's important for people to learn that there's more to what they are than just what's on their business card, as they can begin to experience themselves with regard to their own divine nature and their own spaciousness far beyond what they just see in the mirror in the morning, that they have divine abilities, they have psychic abilities, and those abilities are natural. It's a gift, and I'd encourage people to get in touch with the part of themselves that's psychic, and you can use that to avoid an accident driving on the freeway.
Great. Well, you've heard it. This is Paula Gloria, and this is Farther Down the Rabbit Hole with Russell Targ and my sister Helen Tsaconas. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thank you. That was great.
So people can Google
This is
Russell
like a
Targ.
new show called Ask Me Anything.
Yeah.